I'm Father Dave Pavanka. As president of Franciscan University of Steubenville, it is my joy to meet people from all over the United States and around the world. They're talented, they're holy, fiery, and funny, and I so enjoy speaking with them. Recently, I had an in-depth conversation with author, wife, and mother Emily Stimpson Chapman about her new book, Letters to Myself from the End of the World. This inspiring, wise, and entertaining book is a collection of letters Emily wrote to her 25-year-old self during the turbulent summer of 2020. Emily and I spoke about her book's themes of suffering, and hope, and food and the Eucharist, adoption and motherhood, the power of grace to transform every part of our lives. And this is our conversation. I think probably the toughest person I know is my mom. I mean,
she raised you.
Well, no, not just because that. She raised 5 boys, which was pretty impressive, and a sister. But my mom also had multiple sclerosis. And yeah, it's one of those things as a kid, you don't think much about it, but you would take that. But she was just, my mom was just tough. You know, she was going through a lot just with her disease and struggling with that. But what it taught me from actually really early on is that, and this may sound awful, but that women were really tough. Like, you know, and that's what, when in the chapter that you do on the genius of feminine genius, is your very beginning is you say, love as a mother loves. And I just thought that was an interesting starting place on what does it mean to be a woman, and yeah, why did you start there?
Well, I mean, we talked about before when I think I was 19, and I was really wrestling with everything. I was wrestling with
life.
Faith, life, boys, all of it. And I remember walking across my college campus, and thinking, what does it mean to be a woman? And I didn't know, because I'd had this version of femininity that I saw in magazines and on my campus. And, you know, it was like this where my worth was in my beauty. Like, to be a woman meant you were beautiful. Okay. And then that's right after I remember the boy when I'd left the church. Yeah. So then I was getting this version of femininity from the evangelical church I was going to, where none of the women worked. A lot of the women, they didn't even encourage to go on to higher education. Yeah. So you weren't encouraged to go to school. They didn't express opinions. I don't know, I felt like I stood out like a sore thumb in the group. And I didn't know what it meant to be a woman. And so in my head, came up with this idea that to be a woman meant, like, all I knew is that I could be thin. Like, if I could be thin enough and delicate enough and fragile enough, like, I thought nobody would notice the opinions. Yeah. It didn't work.
It didn't work.
But that was in my head for the longest time, until I came back to the church. And I walked into a bookstore near the Catholic University of America. Do you remember that great
Newman bookstore?
The great bookstore they used to have. Yeah. And I saw a bunch of books by Jean Paul II. And so I bought everything there was, and I started reading. And he was talking about the feminine genius. And particularly in the theology of the body, he talks about how, you know, the mystery of femininity is revealed by motherhood. And I had to think through that. I'm like, well, what does that even mean? But the whole idea of everything in a woman's body is ordered to motherhood. Our hormones, our organs, everything about us is ordered to motherhood. And the physical reveals the spiritual. You know, that's the theology of the body. So the physical is always speaking.
That's actually, you talk a little bit about the physical reveals the spiritual. That's kind of mind-blowing if you think about it, but it's the nature of the incarnation, isn't it? That God takes on flesh in the physical. He doesn't just talk about how much he loves us. He shows us by his body. He actually takes flesh.
Yes, all the visible world reveals invisible truths about us, about God, about grace, about nature, all of it.
And I just say that's something good, because it's fundamentally Catholic, is this whole idea of incarnational principle. We don't have a problem with statues and incense and water and all of those things, because it helps lead us to the Lord. All of those things the Lord can use to lead him to himself. Yeah. But the body uniquely.
The body uniquely. And the woman's body, just with men, like everything in a man's body is oriented towards fatherhood. But it doesn't end with like physical fatherhood and motherhood, which I was 25 and single and childless at the time, so I had to wrestle with that. But John Paul II is talking about spiritual motherhood. Like, physical motherhood is good and beautiful and whole in itself. But physical motherhood always is ordered to spiritual motherhood. Like if I adopted my babies. I didn't give birth to them. But if I had just given birth to my babies and it was like, okay, you're on your own. Like I'm not mothering them. Motherhood is, you're teaching your children the virtues.
So just sorry. Are you?
You don't want to let me talk, do you?
Well, I just want to understand. You're talking to a very simple person here, okay?
Okay.
But so the genius of being feminine is inherently mother, and obviously the woman is ordered towards motherhood. The body's created that way towards all the things.
Right, but the physical reveals the spiritual. So the physical acts of mothering, all the things that I do for women welcome life into their bodies. They nourish the life. They nurture the life. They form their children in the virtues. They pray for their children. They protect their children. Like those are the acts of spiritual motherhood. And so that's what all women are called to. So whether you're single or married or fertile or infertile, you're religious, whatever, like we're all called to be spiritual mothers in the sense that we're called to welcome the other. We're called to nourish and nurture life. We're called to defend the littlest and the weak. We're called to, I always talk about with women's strength, like tenacity. Like women hang in there. Like women hang on. That Mary at the cross. Mary, I always think of Mary as the ultimate model of spiritual motherhood. Even like providing wine at the wedding. Like she notices what people need and she responds to those needs, or she gets someone who can respond to those needs. So that's the feminine genius. Like that's what women, our role in helping Jesus like bring this world to the Father is to love people as mothers, whether we're actually their mother or not.
So women love differently than guys.
I think so.
I think so too.
Yeah, I think so. There's obviously overlap, and it's not, okay, so gender roles, obviously, I work. I'm a writer. So it's not like I think there's these very specific gender roles a person has to be in. There's some women who might be good mechanics. There might not be as many women who want to be mechanics as men, because I think men and women's minds work differently. So it's not about like what we're doing, and it's not always, it's not always cut and dry. Like if you're a man, you will not respond to a person this way. If you're a woman, you won't respond to a situation that way. But it's answering a call to love. And so for me, I'm not always good at being gentle, like controlling my strength. But that's a fault. I'm not going to get to the end of my life and be like, I'm so glad I never worked on that gentleness thing because it didn't come naturally to me. Like I don't think anyone at the end of their life is going to look back and be like, yeah, that whole welcoming people, that was for the birds. Why would I want to do that? That wasn't my nature. So it's growing into your motherhood as well. I think we're always growing into our motherhood, learning how to love people in the ways that they need to be loved, throughout the course of our life.
I think the culture is kind of schizophrenic. On one hand, it wants to say, like you just said, that men think differently than women. And I think that's true. But there's a population that would say, okay, that's crazy. Men and women are the same, and yet they want us to be different. It's just kind of schizophrenic.
When you're yourself.
Right now.
So before you're man or woman, you're yourself. You're David, you're Emily. But then God created you as a man or as a woman. And as that gave you a mission, like as a man, you have a mission to love the world like a father. As a woman, I have a mission to love the world like a mother. And if I'm not doing that, and lots of people aren't, and lots of people aren't loving the world like fathers, that's where you see so much of the brokenness. People are just dying for a mother's love and a father's love. And they're looking for it in wrong ways, and they're acting out because they're not finding it. And so helping people, helping women, and helping men figure out how to love as God entrusted that mission to love to them, I think is one of the keys to, you're not gonna have a new evangelization without people being spiritual mothers and fathers.
Yeah. So when you came to understand this, that the Lord had made you different, that there was something about you that's unique, that's different than anyone else, and you express that by this kind of thing. You express your care and your concern for people and being motherly by hospitality, and because we even question, like, is this a good thing for us to talk about while you're making dinner?
I know, and I thought I put on like a little dress while I'm in the kitchen to do it. No, I can be somebody who reads Plato and James Baldwin and also cooks and serves and wear a dress. Like that's who I am. That's Emily. And I can enjoy things that are stereotypically feminine, things that aren't stereotypically feminine, but should be, because there's no reason women shouldn't be reading James Baldwin. But it's, for me, this hospitality is huge. Like I love to cook. I love to host. I love welcoming people in. You know, like when I didn't, I mean, you know this, but I didn't get married till I was 41. I didn't have our son. We didn't adopt our first son till I was 43. So I really had to wrestle throughout my 20s and 30s. Like, well, how
do you define yourself?
How do I be a spiritual mother? Like, what does that look like? And I found that by welcoming people into my home and always having an open door, and, you know, everyone always has a place here. It's one of the reasons we bought this big house, is so that we could welcome people all the time. We just had a family with 7 kids here staying here last week. You know, they actually stayed with us the week after Chris and I got back from our honeymoon. So Chris and I committed, like, at the start of our marriage, we're like, all right, charism's going to be part of our hospitality, and we're going to dive right in and just open the doors as soon as we can. But yeah, I feel like feeding people and welcoming people, and it's great. So like you and me doing this is what I always do. You know, I pour a glass of wine and you can talk and you can listen to people. And so there's so much grace given in any meal, because every meal is a foreshadowing of, you know, the Eucharistic meal. So
what, you know, you're 40, whatever you are now. 40
now, 46.
Yeah. But
we're all getting old,
so writing to your 23-year-old self, the world's changed a lot. I mean, how do you walk her through and defining what it is to be a woman, and where her struggles are going to be, and being confident, and what do you look to? Yeah,
I mean, I think for me, one of the things that's helped me grow in spiritual motherhood is starting to identify the devil's lies, because the devil does not want women being spiritual mothers. The devil does not want men being spiritual fathers. And the devil is so subtle, because he just operates in the background of our minds. You know, he tells us the same lies over and over and over again, so we don't even realize it's him. Like it's that's just what we've always believed. So for me, it was identifying those lies, starting with envy, because, you know, my theory is that Satan may have tempted Adam to fall through pride, but Eve fell through envy. Like envy is the female sex's besetting sin.
So like one of the things I think that, just walking with people, there's kind of this dominant lie. For you, is that it? It's envy?
I think it's envy. I mean, because you're always comparing. You know, you're always evaluating someone else's life is better. Someone else's life is easier. Someone has more. And that divides women so much, because women are called to be mothers to each other. You know, we're called to love each other and welcome each other. And if we're so busy thinking about what the other person has and what we don't have, that turns us in on ourselves.
Yeah. You tell a story of an experience that you had you're in Mass, and the little girl was in front of you.
She wasn't a little girl. She was my age.
Seriously? Okay.
Yeah. So no, she had. So I don't like my hair. I've never liked my hair.
Can we keep on moving on another topic?
Not my hair. So anyhow, she had this gorgeous hair, and it was thick, and it was curly, and it was like the hair that I've always wanted. And I spent the whole of Mass thinking about her hair and wishing I had her hair and feeling bad that I didn't have her hair.
This is a place I've never been. So
I know, because you're not a woman. I'm telling you, this is our besetting sin. So I'm so jealous of this woman's hair, and I'm not paying attention to the gospel. And then we get up to go to communion, and she had no hands. Like,
well, when you read, I read that chapter like paragraph 3 times. It's like, is that true?
It's true. It's so true. I swear to God, cross my heart, hope to die, stick a needle in my eye. It's the God's honest truth. It sounds like it's a parable, but no, it's true. It's dead true. And
like, what did that? Yeah, exactly. Where did you go with that?
I just was like, God was like, okay.
Yeah.
See, why don't you shut up? Be grateful for your hair.
Yeah.
And for your hands.
Yeah.
So I felt like God was not dealing with me subtly that day. But that's just an extreme example of what happens all the time. You know, we spend time envying people on social media who seem to have the perfect home, or we envy the person who has kids when we're struggling with infertility, or we envy the person who has young parents when we have old parents. There's always something to envy. We envy someone's knife. Someone's got a better knife set than us. But when we're doing that, we're missing out on opportunities to love the person. We're missing out on seeing what God has given us and how he wants us to use those gifts to serve.
But isn't envy almost always, you eventually look down on yourself. So you recognize a part of another person and then what you don't have or what you're not or what you could have been or what you wanted to be or what you should have been.
I mean, it's related to pride because we feel like we should have all that. I should have great hair. I should have the fantastic house. I should have 6 kids. I should have whatever it is. Like we're entitled to anything. But we're not entitled to anything. Everything is a grace. And so it is a real form of pride, but it's a specific form of pride that I think is a real struggle for.
Yeah, when you were saying that, I was wondering, are men and women different? And yes, they are. And do we handle envy different? You know, just having worked with college students for so long, it is the struggle with young women is looking at other women and what do you look to? And you look at, like you said, magazines, and they never measure up. And that's they never measure up. They never quite belong. And I think that's the lie that so many of them struggle with.
Yeah, I mean, you can put 10 women in a room together and it's like a circle of envy. You know, like one woman's envying another person's hair. The other person is envying the other person's weight. The other person's envying their children or they're envying their husband. And you can just go round and round. And when you're doing that, you're not thinking about the other person. You're not thinking about their sorrow, their brokenness, what they need from you, how you can love them, how you can reach out to them. You know, you shut them out instead of inviting them in.
So that's the answer. Invite them in. How do you do that?
Have them over for dinner. I don't know. Like I always think about the C.S. Lewis quote where he talks about the easiest way to acquire a virtue is to just do the act. So if you're struggling with kindness, do something kind. And eventually it works its way inward. And I think it's that way with inviting people in, you know. So you go up and you talk to the person who's not like you. You invite the person who is not like you out for coffee or over to dinner, and you ask them questions about their life and you really listen to them and get to know them, and don't be so focused on talking about yourself. And the more you do that, the more you start to hear others' brokenness and learn other people's stories. And yeah, you just realize how silly envy is, because most of us wouldn't want anyone else's life if we could see the whole of it.
Well,
So.
I mean, this is a story that I've told 1,000 times, and my family's probably watching this and rolling their eyes, but it was an encounter experience I had when I was walking the Camino. And what I joke is that you develop backpack envy. And by that, you look at everybody else's backpack and you wish you had theirs, because theirs is not as heavy as mine and nobody realizes how heavy. And there was this one guy, he had this little teeny backpack, and it's like, why couldn't I have had his backpack? And long story, we end up in the same room together one evening in the Camino, not like the hostel that you would do where everybody goes to nice vacation rooms. We're all in one big room, and he puts down his backpack and he leaves the room, and I got to figure this out. So I run up and I pick up his backpack. And it was like 3 times heavier than mine. And what I came to understand is just what you're saying is everybody's got a story. Yeah, that was a line from The Greatest Showman. Yeah, everybody's got a story. And the struggle with envy is that you're not able to recognize that, and you're not able to know their story, and you make a person, you know, what they look like or what they don't look like.
I mean, you become resentful of what God hasn't given you,
yeah.
instead of being grateful for what you do have. And so, like, that's why the hand thing, I'm like, okay, instead of giving thanks to God for my whole strong, healthy body and hands that can cook and can write and can do all these beautiful things, I was envying
your hair wasn't curly enough.
Yeah, my hair wasn't curly enough. I was mad my hair wasn't curly enough. So God kind of humbled me with that one.
It seems like we always go back there, but I think it's the reality is we have a tendency not to recognize the suffering of the other person.
I mean, I think most of the problems in our world stem from not understanding ourselves, not understanding God, and not understanding sin. Mm-hmm. And when you have a correct understanding of those 3 things, right action can follow from that, and right feelings can follow from that. But because we don't understand ourselves, and we don't understand God, and we don't understand how deeply sin breaks us, we're always just thrashing around trying to figure out how to react properly, and we don't.
I was just at a conference last week, and the guy giving the talk, the Friday night talk, it was actually really outstanding. But one of the things he was saying is 2 things. One, that, and it seemed interesting because we're really talking about the spiritual life and our relationship with Jesus, but he said, key to a good relationship with Christ is self-knowledge and self-awareness. And I think that's what you're getting at, is to be able to celebrate who you are, to be more confident in who you are, you need to become more self-aware. Those lies that are going through your mind that hijack you, that hijack your day, that hijack your relationships, the more we become aware of that, then you can be the fuller Emily that God's called you to be.
Right, you can get out of yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, Satan wants us focused in on ourselves, because he was. You know, Satan was entitled to something. He didn't have something. He didn't like it. And he still is focused on himself. And so that is one of the tricks he always uses to get us to not love others. Right. Because Jesus went fully out of himself. You know, Jesus came and he focused on, some of the things I loved about John Paul too. You know, when you met him, when you saw him, when you interacted with him, he was so focused on the person. Well,
and that's the other thing you talk about. You talk about presence and in the present moment and being present in that moment, that there's something about that that's important just for being human and being in relationship.
Well, that's always been one of my biggest struggles. As I check the
more mayonnaise, right?
What? More mayonnaise, yeah. When we're always thinking about the future, we're always dissatisfied with the present. Because we're thinking about a perfect future. Like, there's always, I guess, this is one of the things as a mom. Like, I have 3 little kids, you know, 3 under 3. And I've been wrestling. It's hard. It's so hard. And it's easy to be longing for the day when my kids can dress themselves, or they're potty trained, or, they're not dumping trucks all over the place. Like, there's not 500 construction vehicles in my dining room. But when that day comes, I won't have those problems, but I'll have other ones. You know, maybe my parents will be gone. Maybe one of the kids will be sick. Maybe, but the kids won't be sweet babies anymore either. They won't be kissing me and sitting on my lap and telling me I'm beautiful.
No, I remember.
So it's
with a student one time, and she was like 22 years old, and she desperately wanted to be married, and you can relate to that, I'm sure. And I was saying that, as I celebrate, this is where you are, and this is where the Lord has you, and rejoice in that. She went to Mass one day, and there was a family in front of her, and with a lot of kids. And this time she saw it differently. She saw that the mother wasn't able to really pray, and the mother was, during the entire liturgy, taking care of her daughter and her son and those kinds of things. And she came to me later, and she said, I realized, and I was really convicted, that I get to go to Mass, and I get to be quiet, and I get to be still, and I get to pray. And when I'm finally, and she's married and has kids now, it's going to be like you. It's going to be a train. I was going to say, it's going to be a train wreck.
I haven't heard a word at Mass
say,
for like 3 years. I don't know. I don't know what they say anymore.
Yeah.
No, I mean, God is not in the future.
Right.
Grace is not in the future. Grace is only in the present. Like, God is in the present. And if you are so focused on the future, you miss out on the graces of the day and the lessons of the day and the challenges and gifts.
This world is either graced or it's not.
Right.
And by the incarnation, by Jesus' coming, this world is grace, and by us not being able to recognize it and see it. Okay, one of the things that you spend quite a bit of time talking on, and I thought it was beautiful, was that ultimately this body is good. Romans 12, I love Romans 12, 1 and 2. Offer your bodies a living sacrifice to God, holy and pleasing to the Lord. And I have given that penance, taking a look at that scripture, to more women over the years, because an inability for them to see their body is good. I mean, Paul says, that the body is holy. You have the whole chapter. One of the letters you write to yourself is not being so consumed by a number on a scale. Yeah. And working with young people, with young women, I'm not going to say all of them, but the vast majority of them, this is a major issue.
It is, even women who don't. So I had, I struggled with an eating disorder for 6 years. And there were lots of issues that went into that eating disorder, and God healed me of those, and that's been a great grace. But struggles with body image don't go away.
One of the things you said that very thing. You said you're going to learn to love your body, and that there will be healing will come with that.
Yeah. I think I said, well, not always love your body, but care for your body. Right, because that's the difference, because you don't always love your body. When you're assaulted by image after image after image that says only women of a certain size and a certain shape and a certain color are beautiful, it's really hard to find your body decent, let alone beautiful. But so for me, it started with caring for my body, being like, okay, even if I'm having these feelings about my body, God gave me this body and he has work he wants me to do in this body and people he wants me to love with this body. So I have to care for it. I can't be starving it. I can't, be exercising it to death. I can't be trying to treat it like a problem to control. I have to treat it like a gift to be cared for. Because your body is not a problem, it's a gift. The angels don't have bodies. If that's something they don't have, we do. It's a great gift from God. And as a mom, it's like this go back and forth. Because on the one hand, I see all these beautiful ways my body is able to love my children. And they love its softness. And they love, they love hugs from mommy and being in mommy's lap. And they don't want to be with Chris when they're sad or upset, like it's only mommy. But those are the very things that you struggle with your body as a woman. But I'm not, ripped. I'm not, angular. I'm not skinny. And I think it's an interesting life, Satan. Like he so hates motherhood that he's made us hate even the look of it, the fullness that comes with motherhood, and think that all that is beautiful is kind of a prepubescent barrenness. Like he hates motherhood that much.
I think as Montfort said, the corruption of that which is best is worse. So if he can cause you to hate that which is most beautiful and most wonderful.
Right. So he wants us to hate the look of a mother's body. And that doesn't always make me feel better about being a size bigger than before the kids, when I used to be able to exercise all the time. But it helps me not act on those things. Like it helps me to nourish my body and helps me to, not waste time thinking about it, because that's how he gets us. He gets us to spend time and energy doing that, and we're dieting and we're starving ourselves and we're on this diet that makes us crazy. And all of that is wasted energy that we could be pouring out in love to others and pouring out in prayer and reading and growing and just doing things that actually matter.
And that ultimately comes about when you experience the Lord's love for you and you've experienced the Lord's presence, and other people confirm that. And so you're obviously writing letters to yourself, what you've learned about being a woman and what does it mean to be a woman. And I think so much confusion about that. But the thing that maybe you wrestled with specifically was that you wanted to be married. And there was your 20s that you weren't in your 30s. And how did you reconcile? Because we talk about mother, and I get that, but you weren't a mother and you weren't married. And so much of, how did you wrestle with that? How did life go on? And
that's where it gets back to what we were talking about with waiting. I just realized that there was no husband in view right now. And I always believe that God's will is in the situation. And so God's will at that point in my late 20s through my 30s was for me to be single. And that meant that he had things for me to do now. Like I had to stop waiting for the perfect future and the perfect husband to come along. I had to do what he was asking me to do now. And so for me, that was, I bought a house, and I always thought I had to be married to buy a house, but I bought a house and I restored it and I welcomed people into it. I traveled, I went to Europe all the time. I miss Europe. I loved people as a single woman, and I found that the grace was that's where the grace was. The grace was in the now. It was in it was taking the job, doing the travel, whatever opportunities God was giving me. And I think a lot of single women worry. They're like, well, if I do that, that's going to get in the way of a husband when he comes along. Right. Right. He's going to be intimidated because I own a house or I've done this. And what I found is that those things made me the woman that Chris fell in love with. They weren't an obstacle. And they also prepared me for motherhood. Like I am so much more prepared for being a wife and mother because I took advantage of all of the opportunities God was giving me to grow and learn when I was single. And so, just again, it's not waiting. It's living the life God is calling you to live right now, and not thinking that life is something in the future. Yeah,
two thoughts are coming to mind. I remember I was dealing with a young woman in Washington, D.C. when I was living in D.C. She was 25, wanted to be married. And the more I talked to her, the image I had was that she was basically saw herself as a piece of fruit waiting to be picked from a tree. Some guy was going to pick, and I said, you can't live. And it was really, I think it was a grace moment. She began to kind of weep, and she realized that, oh my gosh, that's exactly what she was doing.
She thought she was getting past her ripeness, and she's not going to be good anymore, and she's going to be a rotten piece of fruit that nobody's going to want. Yeah. And
the other is my brother got married when he was 30 or 31, and his wife was the same. And I love the fact on their wedding day, they didn't choose the readings, love is patient, love is kind. It was seek ye first the kingdom of God and everything else. And they wanted everyone to know on their wedding day that God was faithful. In the midst of it, that God was faithful. The one sentence, one line that your 46-year-old person tells your 23-year-old about being a woman. How do we close this one?
Like, you do belong. You have a place. You have a place when you're in the church. You have a place in people's homes, when you're single, when there's no babies. Yeah. Even though you may have different interests than other women, like, we all belong to each other. We all belong in the church. And so just seeing that I'm not, like, I felt so alone for so long. Mm-hmm. And realizing that so many women are feeling alone. Right. It's just freeing to know you're not the only one. And then that frees you up to love. Yeah, maybe close with that. That was one of the lines I loved of Mother Teresa, and I prayed about it much over the last year with so many difficulties. We belong to one another. Yeah. You're a male and I'm female, but there's something about a relationship and caring for one another that when we discover that, we belong to one another. That's beautiful. Good. Can we eat? Yes, we can eat. All right, cool. Okay, let me put that away. Yeah.